The rain fell like 1,000 whispered accusations across the stone paths of Kyoto, each drop a reminder of shame that could not be washed away. Ayame knelt in the center of the courtyard, her silk kimono now heavy with water and mud, the crimson and gold patterns that once caught the eye of nobles reduced to streaks of faded memory. Around her, the paper lanterns of the moonlit orchid teahouse swayed in the wind, their light flickering as if even they wished to turn away from what was about to unfold. The Okasan, the mother of the house who had raised Ayame from a child, stood on the wooden veranda with her face carved from stone. Her hands were folded inside the sleeves of her black kimono, and her eyes held no warmth, no recognition of the girl who had once been her most promising daughter. Behind her, the other geisha watched through the sliding doors, their painted faces pale as ghosts, their whispers rustling like autumn leaves before a storm. Daimyo Matsudaira stood at the edge of the courtyard, his arms crossed over his armored chest, his jaw tight with fury barely contained. He was a man built for war, with shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of a province, and eyes that had seen 1,000 men fall by his command. Tonight, those eyes held nothing but contempt. "You have brought dishonor to my name," he said, his voice cutting through the sound of rain. "You dared to refuse me. You dared to shame me before my retainers, before my allies. For this, there is no forgiveness." Ayame kept her head bowed, her hands pressed against the wet stone. Her heart was a drum of war in her chest, but her face remained still as a porcelain mask. She had learned long ago that to show emotion before powerful men was to give them a weapon they would use without mercy. "I refused nothing, my lord," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the trembling in her bones. "I merely asked for time. I merely asked to honor the memory of silence." The word was a blade. Matsudaira took a step forward, and the samurai who flanked him moved with him like shadows bound to their master. "You speak of honor. You, a woman who exists to please. You are a flower meant to be plucked, nothing more. And yet you dare to decide when and how you will bloom." The Okasan descended the steps with slow, deliberate movements. Her wooden sandals clicked against the stone, each sound a nail in the coffin of Ayame's life at the moonlit orchid. When she reached Ayame, she did not kneel. She did not offer a hand. Instead, she reached down and pulled the ornamental hairpin from Ayame's hair, the one that marked her as a geisha of the first rank. "You are no longer one of us," the Okasan said, her voice empty of all feeling. "You have broken the sacred trust between a geisha and her patron. You have shamed this house. From this moment you are cast out. You have no name here. You have no home here. You are nothing." The hairpin fell into the mud at Ayame's knees, its jade surface now dulled by filth. It had been a gift from her mentor, a woman long dead, a woman who had whispered to her in the dark about duty and sacrifice and the quiet strength that lived in silence. Now, even that memory was being taken from her. Ayame did not reach for it. To do so would be to beg, and she would not give them that satisfaction. Instead, she rose slowly to her feet, water streaming from her kimono, her hair falling loose around her shoulders like black silk unraveling. She met the Okasan's eyes for one brief moment, and in that moment, she saw something flicker there, something that might have been regret or fear, or perhaps both. Then Ayame turned and walked toward the gate. The samurai did not stop her. The other geisha did not call out. The only sound was the rain and her own footsteps and the distant rumble of thunder rolling across the mountains like the anger of forgotten gods. She passed through the gate and into the narrow streets of Kyoto, where the night had already swallowed the last traces of daylight. The city that had once welcomed her with music and laughter now seemed to press in on all sides, the wooden buildings leaning close like spectators at an execution. Somewhere in the distance, a shamisen played a mournful tune, its notes drifting through the rain like the voice of a ghost. Ayame pulled her kimono tighter around herself and kept walking. She did not know where she was going. She knew only that she could not stop, because to stop was to think, and to think was to remember, and to remember was to break. The streets grew narrower, the buildings more decrepit. She had entered the part of the city where the merchants did not venture, where the lanterns were few and the shadows many. Here the ronin gathered in cheap sake houses, their laughter bitter and their swords rusted. Here the beggars huddled beneath awnings, their eyes hollow with hunger and their hands reaching out like the branches of dead trees. A man stumbled out of a doorway and grabbed her arm. His breath reeked of cheap liquor, his teeth were broken, and his eyes gleamed with a hunger that had nothing to do with food. Well, he slurred, his grip tightening. "What do we have here? A fine lady walking alone in the dark? That's dangerous, you know. A man might think you're looking for company." Ayame tried to pull away, but his fingers dug into her flesh like iron clamps. Another man appeared from the shadows, then another, their faces hidden beneath straw hats, their hands already reaching for her. "Let me go," she said, her voice low and sharp. The first man laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "Oh, she's got spirit, I like that. Makes it more fun when we break it." Before Ayame could speak again, before she could scream or fight or run, there was a sound like wind cutting through bamboo, and the man's laughter stopped. His eyes went wide, his mouth opened in a silent gasp, and then he fell backward into the mud, a thin line of red spreading across his throat. The other men froze, their hands dropping to their sides, their eyes searching the darkness for the source of death that had just moved among them. Ayame stumbled back, her heart racing, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. A figure stepped out of the rain, tall and lean, his face hidden beneath the wide brim of a woven hat. In his hand, he held a katana, its blade gleaming even in the dim light, not a single drop of blood clinging to its surface. He moved with the economy of a man who had killed before, and would kill again, without hesitation. "Leave," he said, his voice quiet, but edged with steel, "or join him in the mud." The men did not need to be told twice. They scattered like rats before a flood, their footsteps echoing through the narrow streets until they were swallowed by the night. The ronin stood still for a moment longer, his gaze fixed on the place where they had disappeared, and then he turned to look at Ayame. She could not see his face clearly beneath the hat, but she could feel his eyes on her, assessing, measuring, deciding. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The rain continued to fall, the thunder continued to roll, and the dead man continued to bleed into the earth. Finally, the ronin sheathed his sword with a smooth, practiced motion. "You should not be out here alone," he said. "This part of the city does not forgive mistakes." Ayame found her voice, though it came out rougher than she intended. "I had nowhere else to go." He tilted his head slightly, as if considering her words. Then he turned and began to walk away, his footsteps silent despite the wet ground. After a few paces, he paused and glanced back over his shoulder. "There is a temple at the edge of the city," he said. "The monks there do not ask questions. They will give you shelter for the night. Go there before the wolves find you again." Ayame hesitated, her pride warring with her desperation. But the cold was seeping into her bones, and the rain showed no sign of stopping, and she knew that she would not survive another encounter like the one she had just escaped. "Thank you," she said, the words tasting strange on her tongue. It had been so long since she had thanked anyone for anything. The ronin did not reply. He simply continued walking, his figure dissolving into the rain and the darkness, until Ayame could no longer tell if he had been there at all, or if he was merely another ghost in a city filled with them. She stood alone in the street, the dead man's blood mixing with the rainwater at her feet, and for the first time in her life she felt truly invisible. Not the graceful invisibility of a geisha who moves through a room like a breath of wind, but the brutal invisibility of someone who has been erased from the world. And yet, she was still standing, she was still breathing, and somewhere deep inside her, beneath the layers of shame and fear and exhaustion, there was an ember of something that refused to die. Ayame turned in the direction the ronin had indicated and began to walk. Each step was an act of defiance against the night that sought to consume her, against the city that had cast her out, against the fate that had been chosen for her by men who believed they had the right to decide her worth. The temple appeared through the rain like a mirage, its gates weathered by time and neglect, its walls covered in moss and creeping vines. A single lantern hung beside the entrance, its flame guttering in the wind, but refusing to go out. Ayame pushed open the gate and stepped inside, her footsteps echoing across the empty courtyard. An old monk emerged from the main hall, his robes simple and worn, his face lined with the weight of years and sorrows. He looked at her without surprise, as if women fleeing the night appeared at his door as regularly as the sunrise. "Come," he said simply, gesturing toward the hall. "You are safe here." Ayame followed him inside, and for the first time since she had knelt in the mud of the moonlit orchid, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of what had happened. Her legs gave way, and she sank to the floor, her hands pressed against the smooth wood, her breath coming in ragged sobs that she could no longer contain. The monk did not try to comfort her. He did not ask her name or her story. He simply sat beside her in silence, his presence a quiet anchor in the storm that raged inside her. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing away the blood and the mud and the footprints of the day. But inside the temple, In the flickering light of a single candle, Ayame began to understand that she was not broken. She was not nothing. She was something else entirely, something that had not yet been named, something that would not be so easily cast aside. And somewhere in the city, in the shadows between the lanterns, a ronin with no name and no master wiped the rain from his blade and wondered why he had saved the woman in the rain. He told himself it was because he had nothing better to do, because he was bored, because the men had annoyed him. But deep down, in a place he did not like to visit, he knew it was because he had seen something in her eyes that he recognized, something that mirrored the ghost that lived inside his own chest. He had seen the look of someone who had lost everything and was still standing, still breathing, still refusing to lie down and die. And that, he knew from bitter experience, was the most dangerous kind of person in the world, the kind who had nothing left to lose. The morning arrived without fanfare, the sun breaking through the clouds like a reluctant witness to the world below. Ayame woke on a thin mat in a corner of the temple, her body aching from the cold and the hardness of the floor, her mind still clouded with the fragments of dreams that felt more like memories trying to claw their way back to the surface. The old monk was already awake, sweeping the courtyard with slow, methodical strokes. He did not look up when she emerged from the hall, her kimono now dry but stained beyond repair, her hair loose and unkempt. She felt exposed without the elaborate styling and ornaments that had once defined her, as if she had been stripped down to something raw and unfinished. "There is rice and tea in the kitchen," the monk said without pausing in his work. "Take what you need." Ayame bowed, though he did not see it, and made her way to the small kitchen at the back of the temple. The rice was simple, unseasoned, the tea bitter and strong. It was nothing like the delicate meals she had once been served on lacquered trays, nothing like the sweet sake and candied fruits that had accompanied her performances, but it filled the hollow space in her stomach, and for that she was grateful. As she ate, she found herself thinking about the ronin from the night before. His face had been hidden, his voice had been cold, and yet there had been something in the way he moved, in the precision of his strike, that spoke of a man who understood death intimately. She wondered if he had known who she was, if he had recognized her as the geisha who had been cast out. She wondered if he had saved her because he pitied her, or because he saw in her something worth saving. She wondered if she would ever see him again. The monk appeared in the doorway, his broom still in hand. "You cannot stay here," he said, his tone not unkind but firm. "This temple is a place of passage, not a place of rest. You must move on before the day grows old." Ayame set down her bowl and looked up at him. "Where would you have me go?" The monk considered her for a long moment, his eyes shadowed with the weight of 1,000 unspoken stories. "That is not for me to decide. But if you remain in Kyoto, you will be found. The daimyo does not forget those who dishonor him. His reach is long and his patience is short." "Then I will leave the city," Ayame said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I will go where his eyes cannot follow." The monk nodded slowly. "There is a village to the north beyond the mountains. It is small, forgotten by those who hold power. You might find work there if you are willing to do what must be done to survive." Ayame rose to her feet, brushing the dust from her ruined kimono. "I will go there. Thank you for your kindness." The monk shook his head. "I have shown you no kindness. I have merely given you what little I could spare. The rest is up to you." He turned and walked back into the courtyard, leaving Ayame alone with her thoughts and the faint smell of incense that clung to the walls like the memory of prayers long since unanswered. She left the temple as the sun climbed higher into the sky, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets. The city was waking now, the merchants opening their shops, the samurai making their morning rounds, the common folk hurrying about their business with their heads down and their eyes averted. No one looked at her. No one saw her. She had become exactly what the Okasan had declared her to be. Nothing. Ayame made her way toward the northern gate, keeping to the alleys and side streets, avoiding the main thoroughfares where she might be recognized. Her feet were sore, her body exhausted, but she forced herself to keep moving. To stop was to be caught, and to be caught was to face a fate worse than the one she had already endured. She was halfway to the gate when she heard the sound of footsteps behind her, quick and purposeful. Her heart seized in her chest and she quickened her pace, but the footsteps matched her speed, drawing closer with each passing moment. She turned a corner, then another, but the footsteps followed, relentless as the tide. Finally, she stopped and turned to face whoever was pursuing her, her hands clenched into fists at her sides, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. If this was the end, she would not run from it. She would not die cowering in the shadows. But it was not a samurai who emerged from the alley. It was the ronin from the night before. He wore the same wide-brimmed hat, the same dark kimono, the same katana at his side. His face was still hidden in shadow, but she could feel his gaze on her, steady and unreadable. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, the silence stretching between them like a taut bowstring. "You are leaving the city," he said finally. It was not a question. Ayame nodded, not trusting her voice. The ronin stepped closer, and she saw now that his face was younger than she had expected, perhaps only a few years older than her own. His features were sharp and angular, his eyes dark and haunted, his jaw set with a determination that bordered on stubbornness. There was a scar running along his left cheek, thin and pale, a reminder of some past battle that had come too close to ending him. "The roads are dangerous for a woman alone," he said. "Bandits, wild animals, soldiers who answer to no one. You will not make it to the mountains." Ayame lifted her chin, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Then I will die trying. It is better than staying here and waiting for Matsudaira to send his dogs after me." The ronin studied her for a long moment, as if weighing something in his mind. Then he sighed, a sound so faint she almost missed it. "I am going north as well. If you wish, you may travel with me. I cannot promise you safety, but I can promise you a better chance than you would have alone." Ayame hesitated, suspicion warring with desperation. "Why would you help me? You do not know me. You owe me nothing." The ronin turned away slightly, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "Perhaps I do not help you. Perhaps I simply choose to walk the same path, and you choose to walk beside me. Does the reason matter?" Ayame considered his words, searching for the trap hidden within them. But his tone was neutral, his posture relaxed, and there was nothing in his manner that suggested deception. He was offering her a choice, and that alone was more than anyone else had given her in a long time. "Very well," she said at last. "I will walk with you. But if you think to take advantage of me, you will find that I am not as defenseless as I appear." A faint smile tugged at the corner of the ronin's mouth, so brief she might have imagined it. "I do not doubt it. Come. We have a long journey ahead, and the day grows short." They left the city together, passing through the northern gate without incident, the guards too busy extorting tolls from merchants to pay attention to a ronin and a woman in a stained kimono. Beyond the walls, the road stretched out before them, winding through rice fields and bamboo groves, climbing steadily toward the mountains that loomed in the distance like the spines of sleeping dragons. For the first few hours they walked in silence. The ronin moved with the easy grace of a man accustomed to long journeys, his steps never faltering, his breathing never labored. Ayame struggled to keep pace, her feet blistering inside her thin sandals, her legs trembling with exhaustion. But she did not complain. She had learned long ago that to show weakness was to invite contempt, and she would not give this stranger the satisfaction of seeing her falter. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, the ronin finally spoke. "My name is Takeshi. I do not expect you to trust me, but it is easier to travel with someone if you have a name to call them by." Ayame glanced at him, surprised by the simple honesty of the statement. "My name is Ayame, or at least it was. I do not know what I am called now." Takeshi nodded, as if he understood the weight of those words. "Names are given to us by others. They can be taken away just as easily. But who we are, that is something we carry with us no matter what we are called." Ayame felt something shift inside her at those words, a small crack in the wall she had built around herself. "You speak like a philosopher. I did not think ronin concerned themselves with such things." Takeshi's expression darkened, his jaw tightening. "Most ronin concern themselves with sake and gambling and finding the next fight that will give their lives meaning. I am not most ronin." There was a bitterness in his voice that made Ayame want to ask more, to pry open the wound and see what bled from it. But she held her tongue. She knew the value of silence, the way it could protect as surely as any armor. They walked until the last light faded from the sky, and then Takeshi led them off the road and into a small clearing surrounded by tall bamboo. He moved with the practiced efficiency of a soldier, gathering wood for a fire, checking the perimeter for signs of danger, setting out a meager meal of dried fish and rice cakes that he carried in a worn leather satchel. Ayame sat by the fire, her hands stretched toward the flames, her mind wandering through the events of the past day. It felt like a lifetime had passed since she had knelt in the mud of the moonlit orchid. It felt like she had died and been reborn into a world that had no place for her. "Why did you save me last night?" she asked suddenly, the question escaping her lips before she could stop it. Takeshi was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and distant, as if he were speaking to someone else entirely. "Because I have stood where you stood. I have been cast out, abandoned, left to wander the world without purpose or place. I know what it is to be invisible, to be nothing. And I know that sometimes the only thing that keeps us from stepping into the void is the hand of a stranger who reaches out in the dark." Ayame felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away. She had cried enough. She had shed enough of herself. What remained now had to be stronger, harder, forged in the fire of survival. "Thank you," she said quietly. Takeshi glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Do not thank me yet. The journey ahead is long, and the world does not forgive those who fall behind. If you cannot keep up, I will not wait for you." Ayame met his gaze, her chin lifting in defiance. "Then I will make sure you never have to." For the first time, Takeshi smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and softened the hard lines of his face. "Good, because I think you are stronger than you believe, Ayame, and that strength will be tested before this journey is done." They sat in silence after that, the fire crackling between them, the night pressing in from all sides. Above them, the stars emerged one by one, cold and distant, bearing witness to the lives that unfolded beneath their gaze. Ayame lay down on the hard ground, her body aching, her mind racing with thoughts she could not quiet. But beneath the fear and the uncertainty, there was something else, something small and fragile but undeniably real. Hope. Not the hope that things would return to the way they were. That world was gone, burned to ash and scattered on the wind. But the hope that perhaps, in the ruins of what she had lost, she might build something new, something that belonged only to her. As she drifted towards sleep, she heard Takeshi moving quietly around the camp, checking the perimeter one last time, his hand never straying far from the hilt of his sword. He was a man who trusted no one, who expected danger at every turn, who had learned through bitter experience that peace was always temporary and safety was always an illusion. And yet, he had chosen to walk beside her. He had chosen to offer her a chance when no one else would. Ayame did not know what lay ahead on the road to the mountains. She did not know if she would survive the journey, or what would become of her if she did. But she knew that she was no longer alone, and that alone was enough to keep the darkness at bay for one more night. In the shadows beyond the firelight, something moved, a figure watching from the trees, silent and still as death. It observed the two travelers with eyes that gleamed like polished obsidian, calculating, patient, waiting for the right moment to strike. Daimyo Matsudaira had many servants, many blades that cut in the dark, and he did not forgive those who refused him. He did not forget those who brought him shame. The hunt had begun, and the prey did not yet know how close the hunters had come. But they would learn soon enough. They would all learn soon enough. The mountains rose before them like the jagged teeth of some ancient beast, their peaks shrouded in mist and legend. Ayame and Takeshi had been walking for 3 days now, following narrow paths that wound through forests of cedar and pine, crossing streams that ran cold and clear over smooth stones worn down by centuries of water. The world here felt older, untouched by the politics and betrayals of the cities below, a place where the only law was survival and the only judge was nature itself. Ayame's feet had hardened, her body had adapted, and the fear that had gripped her heart when she first left Kyoto had transformed into something sharper, more focused. She was learning to read the forest, to hear the warning calls of birds, to smell the change in the wind that signaled rain or danger. Takeshi said little, but he watched her with a quiet approval that she found more meaningful than any praise. On the morning of the 4th day, they came upon a village nestled in a valley between 2 mountains. It was smaller than the monk had described, a collection of perhaps 20 houses with thatched roofs and walls made of wood and paper. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and the sound of children laughing drifted through the air like a half-forgotten song. It was the kind of place that existed outside of time, where generations lived and died, without ever troubling the great lords who ruled the provinces. "This is as far as I can take you," Takeshi said, stopping at the edge of the village. "There is work here if you are willing to do it. The people are simple, but they are not cruel. If you keep your head down and your past to yourself, they will let you be." Ayame turned to face him, something tightening in her chest that she did not want to name. "You are leaving?" Takeshi nodded, his expression as unreadable as ever. "I have business to the north, a debt to settle, a promise to keep. I cannot stay." "What kind of debt?" Ayame asked, though she already knew he would not answer. Takeshi's jaw tightened, and for a moment she saw something flicker in his eyes, something dark and painful that he quickly buried. "The kind that can only be paid in blood. You do not need to know more than that." Ayame felt a strange sense of loss, as if something that had only just begun to take root inside her was being torn away before it could grow. She wanted to tell him to stay, to ask him to walk with her a little longer, to admit that she had grown accustomed to his presence in a way that frightened her, but she said none of these things. Instead, she bowed her head in the formal manner of a geisha acknowledging a patron's departure. "Thank you, Takeshi, for everything." Takeshi hesitated, and for a moment Ayame thought he might say something more, but then he simply nodded, turned on his heel and walked back down the path they had come from, his figure growing smaller and smaller until he was swallowed by the forest and the mist. Ayame stood alone at the edge of the village, feeling the weight of his absence settle over her like a shroud. But she had no time for sentiment. She had survived this long by moving forward, and she would continue to do so now. She squared her shoulders, pushed back the memories that threatened to drown her, and walked into the village. The people stared at her as she passed, their eyes curious, but not hostile. She was clearly not one of them, with her refined features and her ruined kimono, but neither did she appear to be a threat. An old woman sweeping her doorstep called out to her, "You look lost, girl. Are you seeking someone?" Ayame stopped and bowed politely. "I am seeking work. I am willing to do whatever is needed." The old woman studied her for a long moment, her eyes sharp and assessing. Then she gestured toward a larger house at the center of the village. "Go see Widow Fumiko. She runs the inn and always needs help. Tell her grandmother Hana sent you. She will not turn you away if you are honest and hard-working." Ayame bowed again, deeper this time. "Thank you, grandmother." The inn was a modest building with a wide veranda and a garden that had seen better days. Widow Fumiko was a woman in her middle years, her face lined but not unkind, her hands rough from years of labor. She listened to Ayame's request without interruption, her eyes taking in every detail of the young woman's appearance, from her torn kimono to her calloused feet, to the way she held herself with a dignity that even poverty could not erase. "You have worked before," Fumiko said. It was not a question. "I have," Ayame replied carefully. "In Kyoto, in a teahouse." Fumiko's expression did not change, but something flickered in her eyes, a flash of understanding that needed no words. "You will not find that kind of work here. This is a village of farmers and woodcutters. We have no use for elegance or entertainment." "I do not seek that kind of work," Ayame said, her voice steady. "I seek only a place to sleep and food to eat. I will clean, I will cook, I will carry water, I will do whatever you ask of me." Fumiko considered her for a long moment, and then she nodded. "Very well, you may stay, but know this. I do not tolerate laziness, and I do not tolerate lies. If you bring trouble to my door, you will leave the same day. Do you understand?" "I understand," Ayame said. "Good. There is a room at the back of the inn. It is small and plain, but it is yours if you work for it. You will start today." And so, Ayame began her new life. She woke before dawn to light the fires and prepare breakfast for the travelers who occasionally passed through the village. She scrubbed floors until her knees ached, washed linens in the cold river water until her hands were raw, carried buckets of water from the well until her shoulders burned with exhaustion. It was hard, thankless work, a world away from the graceful movements and cultivated beauty that had once defined her existence. But it was honest work, and there was a strange kind of peace in it. No one here asked her to smile when she did not want to pretend to be something she was not, to hide her thoughts behind a painted mask. She was simply Ayame, a woman who had come from nowhere and was going nowhere, and that anonymity was its own kind of freedom. The days blurred together, each one much like the last. The village accepted her presence the way it accepted the changing seasons, without question or fanfare. She spoke little, kept to herself, and slowly the sharp edges of her pain began to dull. She began to believe that perhaps this was enough, that perhaps she could live out her days in this forgotten corner of the world and be content with the simple rhythm of survival. But the past, she would learn, was not so easily escaped. It was on a night when the moon hung full and heavy in the sky, casting silver light across the mountains, that the shinobi came. Ayame was in the kitchen washing the last of the evening's dishes when she heard the sound. It was barely more than a whisper, the faint rustle of cloth against wood, but in the silence of the night, it was enough. Her hands stilled in the water, her heart beginning to race. She had heard that sound before in the tea houses of Kyoto, where assassins moved like shadows, and death came on silent feet. She turned slowly, her eyes scanning the darkness beyond the kitchen door. For a moment there was nothing, only the ordinary shapes of the inn and the garden beyond. Then she saw it, a figure crouched on the roof of the veranda, outlined against the moon, its form wrapped in black cloth that seemed to drink the light. In its hand, it held a blade that gleamed like liquid silver. The shinobi moved with inhuman speed, dropping from the roof and gliding across the garden toward the back room where Ayame slept. It did not know that she was not there, that she had stayed late in the kitchen, that fate had placed her in its path instead of its target. Ayame's mind raced. She had no weapon, no training in combat, no way to defend herself against a trained killer. But she was not the helpless flower that Matsudaira had believed her to be. She had survived the streets of Kyoto, had walked through the mountains, had endured hardships that would have broken others. She would not die cowering in a kitchen. Her hand closed around the handle of a heavy iron pot, and she moved with the grace that had been drilled into her since childhood, silent and fluid. The shinobi reached the door to her room and slid it open, disappearing inside. Ayame followed, her breath held, her every sense alive with fear and adrenaline. Inside the room, the shinobi stood over the empty sleeping mat, its head tilted in confusion. That moment of hesitation was all Ayame needed. She swung the pot with all the strength she possessed, bringing it down hard on the back of the assassin's head. There was a sickening crack, and the figure crumpled to the floor, motionless. Ayame stood frozen, the pot still clutched in her trembling hands, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She had never struck anyone before, had never even imagined herself capable of violence. But now, staring down at the unconscious shinobi, she felt a cold clarity settle over her. This was the price of survival. This was what it meant to live in a world where power was measured in blood and silence. She knelt beside the figure and pulled back the black cloth that covered its face. To her surprise, it was young, perhaps no older than she was, with features that might have been handsome if not twisted by the disciplines of the shadow arts. On its wrist, she found a tattoo, a coiled serpent with eyes like rubies. She recognized it immediately. It was the mark of the Snake Clan, a group of assassins who served the highest bidder, who killed without question or mercy. Matsudaira had sent them. He had not forgotten her. He had not forgiven her, and he would not stop until she was dead. Ayame heard footsteps behind her and spun around, raising the pot defensively. But it was only Fumiko, her face pale in the moonlight, her eyes wide with shock. "What have you done?" the widow whispered. "I defended myself," Ayame said, her voice shaking despite her efforts to steady it. "This assassin came to kill me. There will be more." Fumiko stared at the unconscious shinobi, then back at Ayame, and slowly, understanding dawned in her eyes. "You brought this here. You brought death to my door." Ayame felt the words like a physical blow. She wanted to deny them, to explain that she had not asked for this, that she had fled precisely to avoid this. But Fumiko was right. By coming to the village, she had put everyone here at risk. The Snake Clan would not stop with one failed assassin. They would send more, and they would not care who else died in the process. "I am sorry," Ayame said, her voice barely audible. "I will leave. Tonight. I will not bring any more danger to you or your village." Fumiko said nothing, but the silence was answer enough. Ayame set down the pot, gathered what few possessions she had, and walked out into the night, leaving the unconscious assassin and the only home she had known in weeks behind her. The mountains loomed above her, dark and forbidding, and the path ahead was shrouded in mist and uncertainty. She did not know where she was going. She knew only that she could not stop moving, could not allow herself to be found. The hunters were closing in, and she was running out of places to hide. She had walked for perhaps an hour when she heard footsteps behind her, quick and purposeful. Her heart seized with terror, and she broke into a run, her feet slipping on the loose stones, her breath burning in her lungs. But the footsteps were faster, gaining on her with every passing second. She stumbled and fell, her hands scraping against the rough ground, and when she looked up, she saw a figure standing over her, silhouetted against the moon. For a moment she thought it was another assassin, and she prepared herself for the blade that would end her life. But then the figure spoke, and she recognized the voice immediately. "You cannot run from them, Ayame. They will follow you until the end of the world." It was Takeshi. He stood there, his katana drawn, his expression grim. Behind him, on the path, lay 3 bodies, their black clothing torn and bloodied, their weapons scattered around them like fallen leaves. He had been following her, watching over her, and when the Snake Clan had come, he had met them with steel and fury. Ayame struggled to her feet, her mind reeling. "You came back." "I never left," Takeshi said quietly. "I stayed in the forest, watching the village, waiting. I knew they would come for you. Men like Matsudaira do not forgive, and they do not forget." "Why?" Ayame asked, her voice breaking. "Why do you keep saving me? What do you want from me?" Takeshi sheathed his sword and stepped closer, and in the moonlight she could see the lines of exhaustion etched into his face, the weight of whatever burden he carried pressing down on him like a mountain. "Because you remind me of someone I failed to save, because I have spent my life running from my past, and I am tired of running, because you deserve better than to die in the dark, alone and forgotten." Ayame felt tears streaming down her face, hot and uncontrollable. All the fear, all the pain, all the grief she had held inside came pouring out, and she could not stop it. Takeshi did not try to comfort her. He simply stood there, a silent guardian in the night, and let her break. When the tears finally subsided, Ayame wiped her face with the back of her hand and looked up at him. "What do we do now?" Takeshi's jaw tightened, and she saw a flicker of something dangerous in his eyes, something that had been sleeping but was now fully awake. "We stop running. We find out who you really are and why Matsudaira wants you dead so badly, and then we make him answer for it." Ayame stared at him, confusion warring with hope. "What do you mean, who I really am?" Takeshi reached into his kimono and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. He handed it to her, and when she unwrapped it, she found a hairpin, jade and gold, intricately carved with a design she recognized instantly, the crest of the Shogun's family. "Where did you get this?" she whispered, her hands trembling. "From the shinobi I killed," Takeshi said. "He carried it with him along with orders to retrieve it from you. But you do not have it, do you? Which means it was taken from you long ago, or hidden, or lost. This hairpin is not just a piece of jewelry, Ayame. It is proof of lineage. It is proof of blood. And someone wants it very, very badly." Ayame's mind raced, fragments of memories swirling like leaves in a storm. She remembered the Okasan giving her a hairpin when she was very young, telling her to keep it safe, telling her it was precious. She remembered losing it years later, or perhaps it had been taken from her. She could not recall. She had thought it just a keepsake, a trinket with no meaning. But now, staring at the Shogun's crest gleaming in the moonlight, she understood that her entire life had been built on lies, that she was not who she thought she was, that somewhere in her past, buried beneath layers of deception and silence, there was a truth that powerful men would kill to keep hidden. "Who am I?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Takeshi met her gaze, and for the first time since she had met him, she saw something that might have been fear flicker in his eyes. "I do not know, but I think we are about to find out. And when we do, the world as we know it may never be the same." The journey back toward Kyoto was fraught with tension, every shadow a potential threat, every sound a warning of danger. Takeshi led them along hidden paths through the mountains, routes known only to smugglers and outlaws, avoiding the main roads where Matsudaira's patrols would be searching. They traveled mostly at night, sleeping during the day in caves or abandoned shrines, places where the world had forgotten to look. Ayame found herself changing in ways she had never anticipated. The soft hands that had once poured tea and played the shamisen were now calloused and strong. The mind that had been trained to anticipate the desires of men was now learning to read the land, to sense danger before it arrived, to move with the silence of a hunter rather than the grace of a performer. She was becoming something new, something that had no name in the world she had left behind. Takeshi watched this transformation with an expression that was hard to read. Sometimes she caught him looking at her with what might have been approval, other times with something that looked almost like regret. He spoke little about his own past, deflecting her questions with half-answers and changing the subject. But she learned things about him through observation, the way his hand went to his sword whenever they passed a shrine, the nightmares that woke him gasping in the dark, the scars that covered his body like a map of every battle he had survived. On the 5th night of their journey, they took shelter in the ruins of an old castle that had been abandoned decades ago, its walls crumbling, its halls empty of all but ghosts and memories. Takeshi built a small fire in what had once been a great hall, and they sat in silence eating dried fish and rice, the flames casting dancing shadows on the broken stones around them. "Tell me about the man you failed to save," Ayame said suddenly, breaking the silence that had stretched between them for hours. Takeshi's jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he would refuse to answer. But then he set down his food and stared into the fire, his eyes distant and haunted. "Her name was Yuki," he said quietly. "She was the daughter of my lord, the man I served before I became ronin. She was young, perhaps 16, with a laugh that could light up the darkest room. My lord had promised her in marriage to another daimyo to secure an alliance, but she was in love with someone else, a young samurai in her father's service. I knew about their secret meetings, their whispered promises. I should have told my lord. I should have stopped them, but I did not." He paused, his hands clenching into fists. "One night they tried to run away together. They were caught at the border by the daimyo's men. He had been watching, waiting for proof of her betrayal. He killed the samurai in front of her, and then he took her back to his estate. My lord, to preserve the alliance, did nothing. He let his daughter be dragged away to a marriage that was little more than a prison. And I stood by and watched, bound by my oath of loyalty, my duty to my master." Ayame felt her chest tighten with the weight of his words. "What happened to her?" "She took her own life 3 months later," Takeshi said, his voice hollow. "She could not bear the shame, the cruelty, the loss of everything she had loved. When I heard the news, I went to my lord and demanded that he seek justice for her, that he punish the daimyo who had destroyed her. But he refused. He told me that her death was the price of peace, that one life meant nothing compared to the stability of the province." He looked up at Ayame, and she saw tears glistening in his eyes, tears he did not bother to hide. "So I broke my oath. I left his service, abandoned my position, became ronin. I told myself I was choosing honor over duty. But the truth is simpler than that. I was a coward. I should have saved her when she was alive, not mourned her after she was dead. I should have been brave enough to defy my lord, to fight for what was right instead of what was convenient. And every day since, I have carried that failure with me like a stone around my neck." Ayame reached out and placed her hand over his, a gesture so simple yet so profound that it seemed to shatter the distance between them. "You were not a coward. You were trapped, just as she was, just as I was. The world does not give us good choices, Takeshi. It gives us impossible ones, and then it judges us for the decisions we make." Takeshi looked at her hand on his, and something in his expression softened, the hard edges worn away by the honesty of the moment. "And yet here I am walking the same path again, trying to save a woman I barely know, risking everything for someone who may already be beyond saving. Perhaps I am a fool as well as a coward. Or perhaps you are simply a man trying to make amends," Ayame said. "Perhaps we are both trying to find redemption in a world that offers none." They sat in silence after that, the fire burning low between them, the ruins of the castle whispering with the voices of the dead. And in that silence, something shifted, an unspoken understanding passing between them that was deeper than words, stronger than duty, more honest than any promise. When morning came, they continued their journey, but the weight that had been pressing down on them seemed lighter somehow, as if sharing their burdens had made them easier to carry. 3 days later, they reached the outskirts of Kyoto, and Takeshi led them to a small house on the edge of the city, hidden among a cluster of other buildings that leaned against each other, like old friends sharing secrets. He knocked on the door in a specific pattern, 3 quick raps followed by 2 slow ones, and after a moment, the door opened to reveal an elderly man with a long white beard and eyes that sparkled with intelligence and mischief. "Takeshi," the old man said, his voice warm with genuine pleasure. "I wondered when you would return, and you have brought a guest. How interesting." "Master Kenji," Takeshi said, bowing deeply, "I need your help and your discretion." Kenji stepped aside and gestured for them to enter. Inside, the house was cluttered with books and scrolls, maps and paintings, artifacts from a dozen different provinces. It was the home of a scholar, a keeper of knowledge, someone who dealt in information the way merchants dealt in silk and rice. "Sit, sit," Kenji said, bustling about and producing tea and small cakes, as if they were honored guests rather than fugitives. "Now tell me what brings you to my door looking like you have been wrestling with demons." Takeshi produced the jade hairpin and placed it on the table between them. Kenji's eyes widened slightly, and he picked it up with careful, reverent hands, turning it over and examining every detail, with the focus of a man who understood the weight of symbols. "Where did you get this?" Kenji asked, his voice suddenly serious. "From a shinobi sent to kill her," Takeshi said, nodding toward Ayame. "He was carrying orders to retrieve it. But she does not have it, never did, which means someone believes she should. Kenji looked at Ayame with new eyes, studying her face with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "What is your name, child?" "Ayame," she said quietly. "I was a geisha in Kyoto until I was cast out." "Cast out by whom?" "Daimyo Matsudaira." Kenji's expression darkened, and he set the hairpin down carefully, as if it were a snake that might bite. "Matsudaira, of course. He has always been ambitious, always seeking to climb higher in the Shogun's favor. But this is something else entirely." He looked at Takeshi. "Do you know what this hairpin represents?" "The Shogun's family crest," Takeshi said. "But beyond that, no." Kenji nodded slowly, his fingers tracing the intricate design. "This is not just any hairpin. This specific pattern, this particular arrangement of jade and gold, was made only once, commissioned by the Shogun himself 23 years ago. It was a gift to his first wife on the birth of their daughter." Ayame felt the world tilt beneath her, the words striking her like a physical blow. "His daughter?" Kenji turned to look at her, and there was sadness in his eyes, the kind of sadness that came from knowing terrible truths. The Shogun's first wife died in childbirth, and the child was believed to have died with her. But there were rumors, whispers in the court, that the child had survived, that she had been hidden away for her own protection during a time of great political instability. Those rumors were never confirmed, and over the years they faded into legend. The Shogun remarried, had other children, and the memory of his first daughter was buried beneath the weight of duty and necessity. Ayame shook her head, her mind refusing to accept what she was hearing. "That cannot be. I am no one. I am a geisha who was sold to a teahouse as a child. I have no family, no lineage, no claim to anything." "Or so you were told," Kenji said gently. "But consider this. Why would a powerful daimyo want you dead so badly? Why would the Snake Clan be sent after you? Why would this hairpin, this specific symbol of a lost princess, be connected to you? These are not coincidences, child. These are pieces of a puzzle that someone has worked very hard to keep hidden." Takeshi leaned forward, his expression intense. "If what you say is true, then Ayame is the rightful heir to the Shogun's line. She has a claim to power that supersedes many of the nobles currently vying for influence." "Precisely," Kenji said, "and that makes her the most dangerous woman in Japan. If her identity were to be revealed, it would throw the entire political structure into chaos. Those who support her claim would rally to her side. Those who oppose it would do everything in their power to destroy her. And the Shogun himself, well, he is old and ill, and his grip on power weakens by the day. The revelation of a lost daughter would complicate the succession in ways that no one can predict." Ayame felt as if she were drowning, gasping for air in a world that no longer made sense. "But I do not want power. I do not want to be part of this. I just want to live, to survive, to find some small corner of peace in this world." Kenji reached across the table and took her hand, his grip surprisingly strong for a man his age. "I understand, but the truth does not care what we want. It exists whether we acknowledge it or not. And now that this truth is beginning to surface, you will have no choice but to face it." Takeshi stood abruptly, his hand going to his sword. "Then we need to get her out of Kyoto, out of Japan entirely. We can take a ship to China or Korea, somewhere Matsudaira cannot reach her." "Running will not solve this," Kenji said firmly. "Matsudaira is not acting alone. He is a pawn in a larger game, a game being played by those who stand to lose everything if Ayame's identity is confirmed. They will hunt her to the ends of the earth, and they will not stop until she is dead, or they are." "Then what do you suggest?" Takeshi demanded, frustration evident in his voice. Kenji was silent for a long moment, his eyes distant as he thought through the possibilities. Finally, he looked up at them with an expression of grim determination. "We go to the Shogun. We present him with the evidence, with Ayame herself, and we let him decide. If he acknowledges her, if he claims her as his daughter, then she will have his protection, and no one in Japan will dare harm her. If he does not, well, then at least we will know the truth and we can plan accordingly." "That is madness," Takeshi said. "The Shogun's palace is guarded by hundreds of samurai. We would never get close enough to speak to him." "Not through the front gate," Kenji agreed. "But there are other ways into the palace, ways known only to a few. I have friends in the court, people who owe me favors, people who would help us for the right price. It can be done, but it will be dangerous, and there are no guarantees of success." Ayame listened to them debate, her mind still reeling from the revelations that had upended everything she thought she knew about herself. But beneath the shock and the fear, something else was stirring. something that felt like anger, like a fire that had been smoldering for years and was finally catching flame. "I will go," she said, her voice cutting through their argument. "I will face the Shogun. I will learn the truth, whatever it may be, because I am tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of letting others decide my fate. If I am his daughter, then I have a right to know. If I am not, then I have a right to live without fear. Either way, this ends now." Takeshi and Kenji both turned to look at her, and she saw respect in their eyes, the kind of respect that came from recognizing courage in its rawest form. "Very well," Kenji said. "Then we begin preparations. But know this, Ayame. Once we set this plan in motion, there will be no turning back. The forces we will unleash cannot be controlled, and the consequences cannot be foreseen. Are you prepared for that?" Ayame thought of the Okasan who had cast her out, of Matsudaira who had tried to break her, of the assassins who had hunted her through the night. She thought of Takeshi, who had saved her again and again, asking nothing in return. She thought of the life she had lived, built on lies and silence, and the life she might yet have, built on truth and her own choices. "I am prepared," she said, and in that moment, she meant it with every fiber of her being. The wheels of fate had begun to turn, and nothing would ever be the same again. Outside, in the streets of Kyoto, word was spreading through the underground networks of merchants and spies, assassins and informants. The cast-off geisha who had vanished into the mountains had returned, and she was no longer running. In the palace of daimyo Matsudaira, a messenger arrived with news that made the warlord's blood run cold. The Snake Clan had failed. The girl had escaped. And worse, she was being helped by a ronin who fought with the skill of a master, who had killed 6 of the clan's best assassins without breaking a sweat. Matsudaira summoned his generals, his spies, his most trusted advisors. He knew now that simple assassination would not be enough. The girl had to be found, captured, and her connection to the Shogun had to be severed permanently, and he knew exactly how to do it. The game was no longer about honor or revenge. It was about survival, about power, about the future of the empire itself, and in the center of it all stood Ayame, a woman who had been nothing and was now everything, a woman who would soon learn that the truth was the most dangerous weapon of all. The plan was audacious, bordering on suicidal. Master Kenji had spent 2 days arranging every detail, calling in favors from contacts accumulated over decades of dealing in secrets and information. The route into the Shogun's palace would take them through the servants' quarters, past the kitchens, through a hidden passage that had been built during the palace's construction and forgotten by all but a handful of people who still remembered the old ways. Ayame was dressed in the plain robes of a palace servant, her hair tied back simply, her face scrubbed clean of any trace of makeup. She looked like 1,000 other women who worked in the vast complex of buildings that housed the most powerful man in Japan. Takeshi wore similar clothing, though he kept his swords hidden beneath a bundle of firewood he carried on his back. They would enter separately at different times and meet inside once they had cleared the outer checkpoints. On the night they chose to make their attempt, the moon was hidden behind thick clouds, and a light rain fell across Kyoto like a whispered prayer. Kenji led Ayame to a small gate at the rear of the palace grounds, where a servant woman waited, her face hidden in the shadows. "This is Hana," Kenji said quietly. "She has worked in the palace for 30 years. She will take you inside and guide you to the meeting point. From there, you will be on your own." Ayame bowed to Hana, who returned the gesture with a slight nod. The old servant woman's eyes were sharp and assessing, taking in every detail of Ayame's appearance and demeanor. Finally, she seemed satisfied. "Follow me," Hana said. "Stay close. Keep your head down and do not speak unless spoken to. If we are stopped, let me do the talking." They passed through the gate without incident, the guards barely glancing at them before waving them through. Inside the palace grounds, the world transformed into something otherworldly, a place of manicured gardens and elegant buildings that seemed to glow in the darkness, lit by countless paper lanterns that swayed gently in the breeze. It was beautiful in a way that made Ayame's chest ache, a reminder of everything she had lost and everything she might have been if fate had dealt her a different hand. Hana led her through a maze of corridors and courtyards, past servants hurrying about their evening duties, past samurai standing guard at key intersections, their faces stern and watchful. Ayame kept her eyes downcast, her breathing steady, her heart pounding so hard she was certain everyone could hear it. They reached a small storage room near the kitchens, and Hana opened the door and gestured for Ayame to enter. Inside, Takeshi was already waiting, his disguise discarded, his swords now strapped openly at his side. He looked at her with an expression that might have been relief or concern or both. "The passage is behind that shelf," Hana said, pointing to a large wooden structure stacked with rice barrels. "It leads directly to the private wing where the Shogun rests. He is old and very ill. His physicians say he has only weeks left, perhaps days. If you're going to speak to him, it must be now." She paused, her eyes meeting Ayame's with an intensity that was almost painful. "I do not know who you are or what you seek, but Master Kenji trusts you, and that is enough for me. I pray to the ancestors that you find what you are looking for." With that, she slipped back out into the corridor and was gone, leaving Ayame and Takeshi alone in the dim storage room with only the sound of their breathing and the distant murmur of voices from the kitchens. Takeshi moved the shelf aside, revealing a narrow opening in the wall, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Beyond it, a stone passageway descended into darkness, lit only by the faint glow of a single torch mounted on the wall. "This is it," Takeshi said, his voice low. "Once we enter, there is no turning back. Are you ready?" Ayame looked at the passage, at the darkness that waited beyond, and she thought about all the paths that had led her to this moment. The teahouse in Kyoto, the streets where she had been cast out, the mountains she had crossed, the assassins she had survived, the truths she had uncovered. Everything had brought her here, to this threshold, to this choice. "I am ready," she said. They descended into the passage, Takeshi leading the way with his hand on his sword, Ayame following close behind. The air was damp and cool, smelling of earth and old stone, and the sound of their footsteps echoed softly in the narrow space. They walked for what felt like an eternity, though it could not have been more than a few minutes, until finally the passage opened into a larger room. It was a chamber that had not been used in years, its walls covered in dust and cobwebs, its floor littered with forgotten furniture and broken pottery, but there was a door on the far side, and through the cracks around its frame, Ayame could see light and hear the soft murmur of voices. Takeshi approached the door carefully and pressed his ear against it, listening. After a moment, he nodded to Ayame and slowly, carefully, opened it just wide enough to peer through. What he saw made him freeze, his hand tightening on his sword. "What is it?" Ayame whispered. "Guards," Takeshi said quietly, "2 of them standing outside another door. That must be the Shogun's chambers. Can we get past them?" Takeshi hesitated, calculating the odds. "We can try. But if they raise the alarm, we will have the entire palace guard on us in moments." Ayame stepped forward, her mind racing. She had lived her entire life reading people, understanding what they wanted, what they feared, what they would respond to. It was the only skill she had that might be useful now. "Let me try something," she said. Before Takeshi could protest, she opened the door and stepped out into the corridor, her posture suddenly changing, becoming softer, more vulnerable. The guards turned immediately, their hands going to their weapons, but Ayame raised her hands in a gesture of surrender. "Please," she said, her voice trembling. "I need your help. I am a servant from the kitchen, and I have been asked to deliver medicine to the Shogun, but I am lost. Could you tell me if this is the right place?" The guards exchanged glances, suspicious but not immediately hostile. One of them, the older of the 2, stepped forward. "The Shogun's chambers are not accessed through the storage rooms," he said, his voice stern. "How did you end up here?" "I took a wrong turn," Ayame said, allowing tears to form in her eyes. "Please, I am so confused. I do not want to get in trouble. If the medicine is late, the head physician will have me punished." The younger guard seemed to soften slightly, but the older one remained skeptical. "Let me see this medicine." Ayame's heart sank. She had no medicine, no proof of her story. But before the guard could press further, Takeshi emerged from the shadows behind her, his sword drawn, his expression cold and deadly. "Step aside," he said quietly, "or die where you stand." The guards reached for their weapons, but Takeshi moved with speed that seemed impossible, his blade flashing in the dim light. In 2 swift movements, both guards were disarmed and on the ground, unconscious, but alive. Takeshi did not kill unnecessarily, Ayame realized. He was a warrior, not a murderer. "We do not have much time," Takeshi said, already moving toward the Shogun's door. "They will wake soon, and when they do, they will sound the alarm." He pushed open the door, and they stepped inside. The room was vast and elegant, with sliding doors that opened onto a private garden where cherry blossoms floated gently through the air like snow. In the center of the room, on a raised platform covered in silk cushions, lay an old man, his face lined with age and suffering, his breathing shallow and labored. Beside him sat a physician who looked up in shock at the intrusion. "Who are you?" the physician demanded. "How did you get in here? Guards!" Takeshi moved forward, his sword pointed at the physician. "Be silent. We mean the Shogun no harm. We only wish to speak with him." The physician's eyes went wide with fear, but he did not call out again. On the platform, the Shogun stirred, his eyes opening slowly, clouded with pain and confusion. "Who disturbs my rest?" he rasped, his voice barely audible. Ayame stepped forward, her hands trembling, her heart in her throat. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind 100 times, but now that it was here, all her words fled, and she could only stand there, staring at the man who might be her father. The Shogun's eyes focused on her, and for a moment something flickered in their depths, something that might have been recognition or surprise or fear. He struggled to sit up, and the physician moved to help him, but the Shogun waved him away. "Come closer, child," the Shogun said. "Let me see your face." Ayame approached the platform, her legs feeling as though they might give way at any moment. She knelt before him, her head bowed, her hands folded in her lap in the formal manner of a supplicant before a lord. The Shogun reached out with a trembling hand and lifted her chin, studying her face with an intensity that made her feel as though he were looking into her soul. For a long moment he said nothing, his breath coming in short gasps, his eyes searching hers for something she could not name. "You have her eyes," he whispered finally, his voice breaking. "Akiko's eyes. I thought I would never see them again in this world." Tears began to stream down Ayame's face, and she could not stop them, could not hold back the flood of emotion that crashed over her. "My lord, I do not know who I am. I was told I was an orphan, sold to a teahouse as a child, but there are those who believe I am your daughter, the child who was thought to have died with your first wife. I have come seeking the truth, whatever it may be." The Shogun's hand dropped away, and he closed his eyes, his face contorted with pain that had nothing to do with his illness. "Akiko, my beloved Akiko, she died bringing you into this world, and I could not bear to look at you, could not bear the reminder of what I had lost. My advisors told me it would be dangerous to acknowledge you, that there were those in the court who would use you as a pawn in their schemes for power. So I agreed to let it be known that you had died with her, and I gave you to a trusted servant to raise in secret, far from the palace, far from the dangers that lurked in every shadow." He opened his eyes and looked at her again, tears now streaming down his own weathered cheeks. "But I was weak. I was a coward. I should have claimed you, should have raised you as my daughter, should have given you the life you deserved. Instead, I abandoned you to a fate I cannot even imagine, and I have carried that shame with me every day since." Ayame could barely breathe, the weight of his words crushing down on her. "What happened to the servant who took me?" "She died when you were very young," the Shogun said. "An illness sudden and unexpected. I sent men to retrieve you, but by then you had vanished, sold or traded or lost in the chaos of that time. I searched for years, but I could not find you. Eventually, I had to accept that you were gone, that I had failed you in every way a father could fail a child." "And the hairpin?" Ayame asked, pulling it from her robes and holding it up. "This was found by those who tried to kill me. They sought to retrieve it from me, though I never had it." The Shogun's eyes widened at the sight of it, and he reached out as if to touch it, but his hand fell short. "I gave that to Akiko the night you were born. It was my promise to her, that our child would always be protected, always be loved. When she died, I placed it with you, hidden among your swaddling clothes. If you have it now, then someone has been watching over you, keeping it safe for the day when you might need it." A sound from the corridor made them all turn. Voices, footsteps, the clatter of armor and weapons. The guards had woken, and reinforcements were coming. Takeshi moved to the door, his swords drawn, his body tense and ready for battle. "We are out of time. They will be here in moments." The Shogun struggled to his feet, the physician rushing to support him. "No," he said, his voice suddenly stronger, filled with the authority that had been absent moments before. "I will not let them harm you. Not again. Not ever again." He turned to the physician. "Go, summon the court. Summon every noble, every samurai, every advisor. Tell them the Shogun commands their presence immediately. Tell them I have an announcement to make that will change the future of this nation." The physician hesitated, clearly torn between his duty to his patient and his confusion at the unfolding events. But the Shogun's glare brooked no argument, and finally the physician bowed and hurried from the room. Within minutes, The corridor outside was filled with guards, their weapons drawn, their voices demanding entry. But the Shogun stood at the door, his frail body somehow radiating power and command, and he raised his hand for silence. "I am your Shogun," he said, his voice carrying over the chaos, "and I order you to stand down. These people are my guests, and they are under my protection. Any who raises a hand against them will answer to me personally." The guards hesitated, confused, but they lowered their weapons. The authority of the Shogun, even one so old and ill, was absolute, and they would not dare to disobey a direct command. Over the next hour, the court assembled in the great hall adjacent to the Shogun's chambers. Nobles and daimyo, advisors and generals, all came hurrying in various states of dress and confusion, wondering what could possibly be so urgent that the Shogun would summon them in the middle of the night. Among them was daimyo Matsudaira, his face a mask of controlled fury, as he saw Ayame standing beside the Shogun, alive and unharmed. He knew in that moment that his plans had failed, that the truth he had tried so hard to bury was about to be revealed. When everyone was assembled, the Shogun stepped forward, leaning heavily on a staff, Ayame at his side. The hall fell silent, every eye fixed on the frail ruler and the young woman whose presence none could explain. "I have called you here tonight to right a wrong that has haunted me for 23 years, the Shogun said, his voice carrying across the hall. "Many of you know that my first wife, Akiko, died in childbirth, and that the child died with her. This is what you were told, this is what I allowed you to believe, but it was a lie." A murmur rippled through the crowd, shock and confusion evident on every face. "The child survived," the Shogun continued. "My daughter survived. But I was weak, and I was afraid, and I allowed her to be taken away and hidden, believing it was for her own protection. I told myself that she would be safer in obscurity than in the palace, surrounded by those who would use her as a tool in their schemes for power. But the truth is that I was protecting myself, shielding my heart from the pain of remembering what I had lost." He turned to look at Ayame, his eyes filled with a love and regret that could not be put into words. "This is Ayame, my daughter, the rightful heir to my blood and my legacy. She has survived hardships I can only imagine, has endured suffering that should never have been hers to bear. And now, before all of you, before the ancestors and the gods, I claim her as my own. She is my daughter, and she is under my protection for all the days that remain to me." The hall erupted in chaos, nobles shouting questions, advisors demanding proof, samurai looking to their masters for guidance. But through it all, Matsudaira remained silent, his face pale, his hands clenched at his sides. The Shogun raised his hand for silence, and slowly the noise subsided. "I know you will have questions. I know you will demand proof. Master Kenji, step forward." Kenji emerged from the crowd, carrying a small wooden box. He opened it and withdrew several documents, scrolls yellowed with age, their seals still intact. "These are the birth records," Kenji said, his voice clear and scholarly. "These are the testimonies of the midwife who delivered the child, of the physician who attended the birth, of the servant who was entrusted with her care. All have been verified. All are legitimate. There can be no doubt as to her identity." He held up the jade hairpin. "And this, the symbol of the Shogun's promise to his wife, given on the night of their daughter's birth. It has been kept safe all these years, waiting for the moment when it would be needed." The nobles looked at each other, uncertainty and calculation evident on their faces. Some saw opportunity, others saw threat, but all understood that the balance of power had just shifted in ways they could not yet fully comprehend. Matsudaira finally stepped forward, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "This is a farce. This woman is an impostor, a clever trick played by those who seek to manipulate you in your illness. She is a geisha, a woman of no consequence, and this entire story is a fabrication designed to throw the succession into chaos." The Shogun turned to look at him, and there was steel in his gaze, a reminder of the warrior he had once been before. Age and illness had weakened his body. "Matsudaira, you speak of impostors and tricks, yet you are the one who sent assassins to kill her. You are the one who sought to silence her before she could reveal the truth. Tell me, why would you go to such lengths to destroy someone of no consequence?" Matsudaira's face drained of color, and he took a step back, his hand going instinctively to his sword. I have done no such thing. These are lies, baseless accusations." "I have witnesses," the Shogun said. "I have testimony from the shinobi you hired, from the servants you bribed, from the spies you placed in the city. You sought to kill my daughter because you knew that her existence threatened your own ambitions. You have allied yourself with other nobles who seek to control the succession, to place a puppet on my throne after I am gone. But you have failed, Matsudaira, and now you will answer for your crimes." Matsudaira drew his sword, desperation evident in his eyes. "I will not be taken by lies and deceit. I am a daimyo, a lord of this empire, and I answer to no one but my own honor." Before anyone could react, Takeshi moved, his own blade flashing through the air. The two swords met with a clash that rang through the hall like a bell, and then they were fighting, moving with a speed and skill that left the assembled nobles gasping. Matsudaira was a formidable warrior, trained in the art of combat since childhood, but Takeshi was something else entirely, a ronin who had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The battle was brief and brutal. Takeshi's blade found its mark, and Matsudaira fell to the floor, his sword clattering from his hand, blood spreading across the polished wood beneath him. He looked up at Ayame, with eyes filled with hatred and disbelief, and then the light faded from them, and he was gone. The hall was silent, the assembled nobles too shocked to speak. The Shogun turned to his guards. "Remove him, and arrest anyone who was party to his conspiracy. This corruption ends tonight." As the guards moved to obey, the Shogun turned back to Ayame, and this time he opened his arms to her. She stepped into his embrace. This man who was her father, this stranger who had given her life and then abandoned her, this ruler who now sought to make amends for the failures of the past. "I am sorry," he whispered into her hair. "I am so sorry." "I forgive you," Ayame said, and she meant it because holding on to anger would only poison the future, and she had seen enough poison in her life. The Shogun held her for a long moment, and then he turned to address the court one final time. "Ayame is my daughter and my heir. When I am gone, she will inherit my position and my responsibilities. I trust that you will all show her the loyalty and respect that is her due. And I trust that she will lead this nation with wisdom and compassion, with strength tempered by mercy, with the courage to face whatever challenges lie ahead." He looked at Ayame. "I know this is not the life you chose. I know this burden is heavy, and you have every right to refuse it. But if you are willing, if you choose to accept this responsibility, then I believe you will be a better ruler than I ever was." Ayame looked out at the assembled nobles, at the faces filled with ambition and calculation, fear and hope. She thought about the life she had lived, the pain she had endured, the truths she had uncovered. She thought about the women who had no voice, the powerless who had no protection, the forgotten who were cast aside by those who held power. "I accept," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Not because I seek power or glory, but because I understand suffering, and I believe that a ruler's duty is to protect the vulnerable, to speak for those who have no voice, to create a world where no one is invisible, where no one is nothing." The nobles bowed, some with genuine respect, others with calculation already spinning behind their eyes. But it did not matter. Ayame had claimed her place, had stepped out of the shadows and into the light, and nothing would ever be the same again. In the weeks that followed, the Shogun's health declined rapidly, and Ayame spent every moment she could at his side, learning the intricacies of governance, the delicate balance of power, the weight of every decision. Takeshi remained with her, no longer a ronin but her sworn protector, a samurai who had finally found a master worth serving. When the Shogun finally passed, it was peacefully in his sleep, with Ayame holding his hand. The entire nation mourned his passing, and then they turned their eyes to the young woman who would now lead them. Ayame's coronation was a grand affair, attended by nobles from every province, witnessed by thousands who lined the streets to catch a glimpse of the lost princess who had returned. She wore robes of silk and gold, and on her head she wore a crown adorned with jade, and in her hand she carried a sword that had been her father's, a symbol of the strength and the responsibility she now bore. But even as she stood before the assembled court, accepting their oaths of loyalty, she did not forget who she had been. She did not forget the streets of Kyoto, the mountains she had crossed, the people who had helped her when she had nothing. She remembered the geisha who had been cast out, the woman who had been nothing, and she vowed to use her power to ensure that no one else would ever be made to feel invisible again. In the months that followed, she implemented reforms that shocked the establishment. She outlawed the practice of selling children into servitude, established protections for women who worked in the pleasure districts, created councils where common people could bring their grievances directly to those who held power. She appointed advisors based on merit rather than lineage, promoted those who showed compassion alongside competence, and removed from office those who abused their positions. Not everyone supported her changes. There were those who plotted in the shadows, who sought to undermine her authority, who whispered that a woman had no place on the throne. But Ayame faced every challenge with the same courage she had shown when she walked away from the moonlit orchid, the same determination she had shown when she crossed the mountains, the same strength she had shown when she stood before the Shogun and claimed her identity. And beside her, always, was Takeshi. Their relationship had evolved into something deeper than protector and protected, more profound than loyalty or duty. They had saved each other in ways that couldn't be measured, had seen each other at their worst, and loved each other anyway. On a quiet evening in the spring, as cherry blossoms fell like snow across the palace gardens, Takeshi knelt before her and asked if she would do him the honor of becoming his wife. Ayame smiled, tears in her eyes, and said yes. Because love, she had learned, was not about grand gestures or perfect timing. It was about choosing to walk beside someone through the darkness, about reaching out a hand when they stumbled, about building something together from the ruins of what had been lost. Their wedding was simple by imperial standards, a quiet ceremony attended only by those who truly mattered. Master Kenji was there, beaming with pride at the role he had played in bringing them together. Widow Fumiko came from the village, bringing gifts of rice and sake, her stern exterior softened by the joy of seeing the girl who had briefly worked at her inn, now standing as the ruler of the nation. Even grandmother Hana, the servant who had guided Ayame into the palace, stood in the audience, her eyes bright with tears of happiness. As Ayame and Takeshi exchanged their vows, promising to honor each other in this life and beyond, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. The pain, the loss, the fear, all of it had been necessary. All of it had shaped her into the woman she had become. She was no longer the geisha who had been cast out, no longer the woman who had believed herself to be nothing. She was Ayame, daughter of the Shogun, ruler of Japan, wife of Takeshi, and architect of her own destiny. The years that followed were not easy. There were challenges, betrayals, wars that had to be fought, and peace that had to be negotiated. But through it all, Ayame remained true to the promise she had made to herself on that rainy night, when she had walked away from everything she had known. She would be strong, she would be brave, and she would use her voice to speak for those who had none. And in the end, when historians wrote of her reign, they would say that she was the shogun who had once been nothing, who had risen from the ashes of abandonment and shame to become one of the greatest rulers the nation had ever known. They would say that she had changed the course of history, that she had brought justice and compassion to a world that had known too much cruelty, that she had proved that true strength came not from power, but from the courage to remain human in the face of inhumanity. But Ayame herself would tell a simpler story. She would say that she was just a woman who had refused to die, who had kept walking when everyone said she should stop, who had believed that even in the darkest night, there was still a path forward if you had the courage to seek it. And that, in the end, was the truth that mattered most. The truth that everyone had the power to choose their own destiny, if only they were brave enough to reach out and claim it. The truth that no one, no matter how broken or cast aside, was ever truly nothing. And the truth that sometimes, the greatest victories were won not on the battlefield, but in the quiet moments when we chose to stand up, to speak out, to refuse to be invisible any longer. This was the legacy of Ayame, the geisha who became a shogun, the woman who had once been mocked and cast aside, but who had risen to show the world exactly who she truly was. And it was a legacy that would endure for generations to come.